Gareth's presentation. Gareth is the CEO of the British Chamber of Commerce in Denmark. And of course, he has also a lot of insight on what's going on, because the commerce component of any agreement with the EU is decisive for how things will proceed. So with that, Gareth, please go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Super. Great. Kirsty, you mentioned a birthday earlier, the 2-year birthday. We've got a 4-year birthday coming up of the vote to leave the EU, and that's coming in the middle of next month, or towards the end of next month. But I'm not going to go back into history. I want to pick up from where we are at the moment. So if I could have the next slide, Christian.
So Gareth, please go ahead.
Great. So yeah, we left the UK left the EU on the 31st of January 2020 this year, and the slides have just gone back. So if you could find it again, Christian, that would be great, so people can see what I'm talking about. But when we left, we moved into the transition period, and that means that we've got until the 31st of December to get a deal on the table and to agree that deal, as Lady Olga has already mentioned. She's much closer to the politics on this. I'm giving you the sort of background and where I think we might be going. But we've got the deadline coming up at the end of June, where it's possible to extend the negotiating period by 1 or 2 years. I seriously don't believe that's going to happen. The British government have made it very clear that they don't want that extension period. I get the impression that there are certain people in the EU, particularly in the negotiating team, that would like the transition period to be extended, so the negotiations can be extended. But we are still facing the situation that we might have at the end of 2020 a no deal. It's a different sort of no deal. The no deals we were talking about before were related to the withdrawal agreement, but here we're in a situation where we could actually, the UK could leave the EU with no trade agreement in place. If I could have the next slide, please. So what's going on? Well, now the negotiations are going on within the transition period. There's a bit of negotiating and positioning going on, as Lady Olga referred to. There's some interesting characters on both teams. Michel Barnier has been there for a while, and he's been he knows the ropes. The British negotiating team is being led by David Frost. David he was at one stage the British ambassador to Denmark, so he's got a background in diplomacy. He has worked in Brussels. He speaks fluent French. That was part of his education at Oxford. So he's probably well qualified. He knows the ins and outs of Brussels. He speaks more than one language, which is, as most of you know, unusual for a Brit. Corona hasn't been helpful in this, because people are having to have these strange conversations over video links or over emails, etc. Fairly recently, there was an exchange of letters between David Frost and Michel Barnier. Frost sent a letter saying, "This is what we want to do. Here are some documents." There were 13 documents published setting out a pretty much standard trade agreement, free trade agreement. Barnier wrote back and said, "Yeah, well, we sent you something in the 18th of March. What about that? We're looking for something different. Clearly, Canada and the UK aren't the same, so the agreements can't be the same. You're right next door. You've been a major part of us. You're a competitor. So this is going to go on, and there's some, let's call it negotiating going on. At the same time as all this is going on, we've got to remember that the UK is also negotiating trade deals with the rest of the world, because it's been using the EU trade deals for the last many years. So that's another set of work that goes on, and these two things are not necessarily disconnected, so they may impact each other. Once we do get to the stage where we think we might have a deal, then there's a ratification process. So, and that's in all the EU countries as well. So we need to realize that the time between now and the 31st of December, which is 220 days, a lot's got to go on to make things work in that period. So what does this mean? Can I have the next slide, please, Christian? So the no deal is still possible. As I've already mentioned, the government does believe the deal can be put in place, and are very bullish about it. The interesting thing, if there's a deal that gets made in draft with Europe, then the Prime Minister should be able to get it through Parliament. He has a substantial majority, and so he's got the tools to get that through. There are many leaders around Europe that are skeptical about this and whether it's going to happen, and they all need to be on board with this. So that's just a little summary of the no deal possibility. Now, as Lady Olga said, we're hoping that something will happen at the last minute, and everything will fall into place, and we'll have something that we can work forward from and continue to build on, and continue to have. It's in everyone's interest that the UK and the EU continues to have a good trading relationship. It's not a total split. We're going to be working together, and everyone wants to work together. And from a business point of view, and I represent businesses, we're looking for some certainty, some clarity, so that we can get on. We've been putting plans in place. We've been looking at scenarios A, B, C, D, E, and F for the last couple of years at least, certainly the big companies. And we want to be in a position so that we can move on and get on with business and know where we stand. If I could have the next slide. So then we come down to data protection, GDPR. Within the period prior to the withdrawal agreement, prior to the 31st of January, or prior to when it was agreed, when it started, and it started on the 31st of January, end of 31st of January. The UK tried to have discussions about adequacy under Article 45, but the clear message from the EU was, we're happy to talk about it, but we're not going to talk about it yet. Now, some people describe this as another negotiating position. Others say we've got other things to do before we start talking about data protection. But during the period from now until the end of the year, it's business as usual. So we carry on going using the existing rules. But if we do get to and this is a situation we don't want, if we do get to the 31st of December this year without a deal in place, the UK becomes a third country, and Article 46 becomes relevant. If I could have the next slide, please. Will the UK be awarded adequacy? Well, there are a few. We've been working to the same rules for a while, you would say, so you could imagine that it should be fairly straightforward, and that's the British position. But the Commission does need to go through a formal assessment process. It normally takes much longer than the time we have, but you can argue that we're close together, so that's not necessarily a problem. We did incorporate the 2018 Data Protection Act within within UK law, so that covers pretty much most things. There are some issues around that, but which we can come on to. The UK as a third country could come under more scrutiny, and there could be some issues around, for example, the Investigatory Powers Act, which there have been some challenges from a human rights perspective on that. So the other interesting factor is that you don't get adequacy and keep it. It comes under review. So there's always a sort of sword of Damocles if you decide to diverge from the standards that have been agreed and seem to be adequate. And I don't think that's in anyone's interest that we diverge massively. Johnson has said that we want to do our own thing, but we do have laws in place. And let's see. If I could have the next slide, please. I'm sure you all know how adequacy is assessed, and we saw Japan go through it. We're looking at the rule of law, effective independent supervisory authorities, international commitments, and as I've already said, we're in a position, and the EU is in a position to reverse a decision. And the next slide. But I think we're pretty much close to each other in regulation at the moment. So unless there's some issues around the European Commission for Human Rights, I think that should go ahead without too many problems. There will be distractions and other trade agreements with other large countries that are wanting to have a say in these in data protection issues as well. The key is that the future relationships shouldn't be affecting the autonomy over the personal protection data rules, but the EU can withdraw the adequacy, of course, if another party drifts too far away. And how much time is there? Great, good timing. Just to finish off, if there isn't a trade deal in place, then this is an out-of-date document, but it would cover it. We would need to have other things in place, as we know, in terms of the various other processes that we typically have for countries that don't have adequacy. So there are things to do for the companies that do move data between the EU and the UK, it's the standard stuff: data protection clauses, binding corporate rules, codes of conduct, etc., and derogations. Those I'm sure you've all been into in a lot of detail. So I will stop there. We could be in the no deal situation. We hope not, but if we are, then companies will need to do something. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gareth. It was very enlightening to hear your thoughts. And of course, there is a big deal of discussion on whether or not the adequacy rule will apply. There is a question from Lena who asked that there is an internal document that says that in the event of a no deal, or there is says that the likelihood of becoming an adequate country is small due to the surveillance access from the UK authorities are high. This is, of course, an internal document. Do you have any thoughts about it, Gareth?
I mean, it's something we've been aware of. There have been some questions around sharing of data and surveillance generally, and also sharing of data with the Five Eyes network from a security point of view, which tends tends to fall out of the standard business world. But people, there are people that are raising issues around this. So it's likely to pop up.
Yeah, and there is also an option that there is some kind of a privacy shield that countries with excessive surveillance get. So perhaps it is a possibility that UK may get something similar. We have seen it happen before.
Yeah, we have seen it happen before, and it's. I think all options are on for the moment.
Okay. Oh, very soft. Thank you very much, Gareth. We will now try again with Lorenza Villa. So, Gareth, if you can mute yourself.